Some new video we want to show you of migrants hoping to reach the United States. These are Venezuelans gathered in the dark in a migrant camp, still thousands of miles from the U.S. southern border and about to embark on one of the most treacherous points of their trek north. Someone prompts the crowd to sing the Venezuelan national anthem before they leave. It was at about 4 in the morning. You can then see them leaving the camp, heading into the Darien Gap, which is a dangerous trail through a tropical forest between Colombia and Panama. A U.S. border official today says they're expecting to see the number of migrants arriving at the southern border with the U.S. to remain high. David Culver is near Mexico's southern border with Guatemala for us tonight. So what can you tell us about the video and the sheer number of people that you've been seeing making this journey?
What's most concerning, Anderson, is that you're seeing these massive crowds, which, sure, you've seen in the past, but they're incredibly organized now, and they seem to go in cycles. So I'll start with a couple of pieces of video, and you'll see in the first one, those are those crowds that you mentioned. And we're seeing now, this year alone, and here we are in September, more than 100,000 than what we saw crossing all of last year. So the numbers are rapidly increasing. It's increasingly concerning and alarming for officials, not only in Colombia, where some of this video is starting, and you can then see them continuing through the jungle, which is in of itself very dangerous, but also officials in the U.S. who are watching this and knowing that those individuals are headed north. Ultimately, the vast majority want to get into the U.S. Now, the jungle portion in of itself is incredibly dangerous. I mean, not only are the terrain elements of themselves treacherous, but people are getting robbed, they're getting assaulted, and some of them have even described seeing others lose their lives right in front of them. I caught up with some folks who are just a few days on the other side of having crossed through that, have now made their way where we are in southern Mexico. Here's how they describe it.
Peligroso, sí. Muy peligroso.
This is very dangerous. Very dangerous.
Siete, ¿verdad? Más o menos contamos, sí, incluyendo un niño como de 8 años.
De 18 años.
Más o menos de 8 años.
De 8 años. Wow. She said when they went through the Darien Gap, she said at least 7 people that they saw who had died, including a child around 8 years old. A couple of hours ago, Anderson, I was talking to a group of kids. They ranged in age between 6 and 12. Their parents were around us as well, listening in. And what was most disturbing is those kids were describing in detail the bodies that they saw along the way, just very matter-of-fact and casual. It shows you kind of some of the trauma that's going to be sitting with them as they're continuing what is still a long journey ahead.
So last week, there were reports the Mexican official had agreed to, quote, depressurize their northern border cities by deporting migrants back to their home countries, but trying to prevent migrants from using the railway system. Are you seeing that, or what are you seeing near Mexico's southern border?
Mexico is dealing with a mess right now, Anderson. I mean, the crowds are building. Let me give you a sense of where we are, and this explains what we saw from the Darien Gap, which continues. This is part of the migrant trail up, and this is Tapachula. So this is just over the border from Guatemala. You can see here what are hundreds of folks, and we've actually even got another camera, too, to give you a better sense of the crowd. Hundreds of folks that have been lined up throughout the past hours, days, some of them even weeks. And even if we continue over here, you can see it goes much farther back, a couple of blocks back. And they're settling in for the night because they've lined up here the offices that are processing some of their asylum claims for Mexico, because that's part of the rules to get to the U.S. They have to claim asylum in a third country, so they're choosing Mexico. Or some of them are just trying to get transit documents. And so they're waiting out until they get their appointments to meet with Mexican officials. They hope to then get those documents. And then, Anderson, once they get them, it essentially buys them time to make their way through Mexico. And every single one has the same destination in mind, the U.S.
Rosa, do we have a sense of what is causing this latest really huge wave of migrants coming to and through the border?
Well, sir, what I've done is I've talked to contacts and sources on both sides of the border, from the tip of Texas all the way to California. And what I've been able to learn from these individuals who work with migrants every day, who talk to migrants every day, is that a few things have been driving this current surge. First of all, they tell me that it's misinformation, and not just the cartels distributing this information, but also when migrants actually enter the country, are processed by U.S. immigration authorities, and then released into communities. These community leaders tell me that when migrants send videos back to individuals, to migrants on the border, showing that they have been processed and are now in America, that gives individuals on the Mexican side a lot of hope, and that has been driving some migrants to go ahead and try their luck and enter in between ports of entry. The other thing that that one community leader tells me from the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas is that kidnappings in Mexico, in that part of the border, so in the area of Matamoros and Reynosa, have increased. And so migrants are having to decide, do they stay and wait for a CBP-1 app appointment, for example, to actually enter the U.S. legally, or do they go ahead and try their luck in fear for their lives crossing the Rio Grande, hoping that they are processed by U.S. immigration authorities and actually allowed to get an immigration court date? But if you ask Customs and Border Protection, what they'll tell you, and U.S. Border Patrol Chief tweeted about this yesterday, is they believe that it's the cartels. They say that it's the cartels distributing a lot of this misinformation, using organizations like Facebook and other social media to distribute information, prompting migrants to then cross the border at certain areas, also so that they can use as decoys, Sarah, so that they can traffic, whether it be drugs or firearms or what have you, in between the ports of entry, to make sure that they can conduct business. Because as you know, at the end of the day, cartels run a business and their goal is to make a buck, whether they are transporting migrants or drugs or firearms. That's what they're up to, and they say that that's what's causing this current surge. Sarah?
You know, the Biden administration right now is planning to build migrant shelters on Park Service land in New York City, and they're waiving environmental laws to do that. They're waiving the National Environmental Policy Act and the Endangered Species Act so they can build these migrant centers, and it's got people in an outrage. Even New York Democrats have joined a lawsuit to stop the Biden administration for doing it. So I think we should be focusing on keeping the government open but closing the border, and we've got a pathway forward to make that happen.